Why only humans are allowed to bypass galactic safety protocols. The galaxy functions on a clockwork rhythm of bureaucracy, governed by a logic so detached from survival that it considers a decade a blink of an eye. Every sector, every system, and every starfaring race bows to the great consensus, a set of protocols designed to ensure that no crisis is addressed without first satisfying the 19-hour deliberation period required for a formal vote. Then there are the humans. The Galactic Council never intended for the Unauthorized Entry Clause to exist. It was an error of legislation, a desperate, last-minute amendment forced through by a frantic delegate who had watched a human commander dismantle a planetary defense grid in the time it took the Council to decide on a luncheon menu. It was meant to be a lock. Instead, it became a key that only one species knew how to turn. For the rest of the galaxy, the universe is a place of infinite caution. You assess, you debate, you poll the subcommittees, and you move when the consensus is absolute. It is a slow, steady, and entirely safe way to exist. But humans do not possess the biological capacity to sit still while the building is burning. They are, by the design of their own brutal evolutionary history, persistence predators. In the ancient eras of their home world, humans did not hunt by speed or by strength. They hunted by simply refusing to let their prey stop moving. They would track, they would shadow, and they would keep pace until the victim, exhausted, dehydrated, and broken by the simple, maddening pressure of being followed, collapsed. That biological imperative is not gone. It is merely buried beneath a layer of starship hulls and diplomatic suits. When a human commander stares at a burning colony through a view screen, they do not see a tactical simulation requiring a 19-hour deliberation. They see prey that is dying. They see a fire that will not wait for emotion to be seconded. The Council learned this the hard way during the siege of Sector 7. A rogue swarm had breached the local orbital shields. Millions of lives were hanging by a thread of atmosphere. The Council met. They discussed the legal ramifications of intervening without a unanimous vote. The humans, sitting in the back of the chamber, stood up. They did not ask for permission. They did not wait for the tally. They walked out of the chamber, boarded their vessels, and jumped into the heart of the fire. By the time the Council had finished their formal vote to authorize a relief effort, the humans had already cleared the swarm, established an orbital field hospital, and were halfway through a reconstruction plan. They had effectively bypassed the safety protocols not through rebellion, but through a sheer, terrifying refusal to acknowledge that the rules of bureaucracy were more important than the reality of the crisis. The Council was horrified. They attempted to sanction the human commanders, citing the violation of the 19-hour rule. The humans simply handed them a report detailing how many thousands of lives would have been lost had they waited for the vote. They didn't apologize. They didn't argue the law. They simply pointed out that when the goal is survival, the speed of the solution dictates the morality of the act. And so, the Unauthorized Entry Clause was written. It is the only legal loophole in the history of the Federation. It explicitly states that in the event of an immediate and existential threat to civilian life, any party authorized by the Council may bypass established voting protocols. And, because the Council is too proud to admit they are simply too slow to react, they quietly designated humanity as the only species eligible for this exemption. They call it a privilege. The humans know better. It is a burden. It means that whenever the galaxy fails, whenever the bureaucracy stalls, whenever the fear of litigation outweighs the need for action, it is the humans who are expected to run into the fire. It is a cold, calculated trade-off by the Council. They get to maintain their precious, slow-motion order, and they get to keep a species on call that is too stubborn, too persistent, and too compassionate to let them watch everything burn. The universe remains quiet, orderly, and slow. The politicians deliberate. The laws are upheld. But in the shadows of the stars, the humans are always watching the clock. And they are the only ones who know that 19 hours is an eternity when you have the heart of a hunter. In the end, the galaxy has realized a simple, uncomfortable truth. They do not need more laws to govern the humans. They need the humans to ensure that the laws do not become a death sentence for everyone else. Persistence is not just a trait of a predator. It is the only thing standing between a stagnant civilization and total oblivion. The next time the alarms sound, do not look for the council. They will still be voting. Look for the ship that moved before the order was ever given. Look for the ones who refuse to wait. Why humans are the only species allowed to break the law. The silence that followed the enactment of the clause was not a peaceful one. It was the silence of a species that had been marked. The High Council, a sprawling collection of sentient life forms that viewed time in geological epochs, did not understand the human spirit. They looked at the Unauthorized Entry Clause as a necessary evil, a pressure valve for a volatile, short-lived species. They thought they had caged the humans with legalese. They thought that by limiting the exemption to only existential threats, they could keep humanity on a short, diplomatic leash. They were wronged. Commander Elias Thorne stood on the bridge of the Valiant, his boots vibrating against the deck plates as the ship hovered on the edge of the forbidden zone. Below him, the planet of Kael'thor was screaming. It was not a literal scream, but a digital one, a cascading collapse of planetary life support systems that was sending shockwaves through the local network. The council was currently in session. They were debating the origin of the failure. They were questioning the environmental impact of a potential rescue. They were 19 hours away from a decision. "Status," Thorne said. His voice was flat, devoid of the frantic energy the council members always expected from humans in crisis. "Systemic failure at 80%, his communications officer replied, her fingers dancing across the console. "The atmospheric processes have seized. The population is suffocating." Thorne looked at the chronometer. 4 minutes had passed since the first distress signal. "They're still voting," the officer added, shaking her head. "The delegate from the core worlds is currently questioning if this is a deliberate sabotage or an accident. They want an investigation team sent first." Thorne felt that familiar hum in his blood. It was the ancestral call, the same instinct that had once pushed his ancestors to run for days across the sun-scorched plains of Earth. It was the knowledge that if you stopped, you died. If your target stopped, they died. "They don't understand," Thorne whispered to the empty air of the bridge. "They think the universe is a courtroom. They don't realize it's a marathon." He did not wait for the alarm to sound. He did not wait for the consensus to break. "Engage engines," he commanded. "Bypass the external atmospheric sensors. We are going down." The Valiant lurched forward, piercing the thin veil of the planet's upper atmosphere. The ship was not designed for atmospheric entry at this speed, but the humans had modified the heat shields with a reckless ingenuity that bordered on insanity. They burned through the sky like a falling star, a streak of defiance against the backdrop of a stagnant galaxy. As they descended, the sensors flooded with data. Millions of lives, children, elders, scientists, all of them tethered to a failing grid that the council was currently debating. Thorne did not hesitate. He ordered the deployment of the atmospheric stabilizer drones. These were illegal in many sectors due to their erratic energy signatures, but they were the only things capable of jump-starting a dying core. The ship slammed into the landing pad of the primary city, the ground shivering under the weight of the massive vessel. Thorne was out the airlock before the dust had even settled. He moved with a frantic, focused efficiency. He saw the citizens huddled in the plazas, their skin turning a translucent blue from the lack of oxygen. He saw their fear. He saw the way they looked at the sky, waiting for the help that the council was still talking about. Thorn did not offer speeches. He did not ask for their names. He simply worked. For the next 10 hours, the human crew acted as the heartbeat of the dying planet. They routed power from their own reactors. They repaired the conduits with hands burned by plasma. They did not eat. They did not sleep. They maintained a pace that the surrounding species found truly terrifying. To the locals, the humans looked like demons. They were machines of pure, kinetic intent. They didn't have the grace of the high-born diplomats or the measured calm of the philosophers. They were messy. They were loud. They were entirely, utterly relentless. When the 19 hours finally passed, the Council's official relief fleet dropped out of hyperspace. They arrived in a perfect, V-shaped formation, their hulls gleaming, their protocols satisfied. They expected to find a graveyard. They expected to find the scene of a tragedy that they would then document, analyze, and file away in the archives of the Great Consensus. Instead, they found the Valiant. The atmospheric processors were running at full capacity. The children were playing in the streets. The population was alive, and the humans were sitting on the edge of the landing gear, sharing synthetic rations and drinking cold coffee, looking exhausted but utterly satisfied. The council delegate, a being of crystalline structure that lived for 3,000 years, emerged from the lead ship. He looked at the scene with a mixture of confusion and profound, existential dread. "You were not authorized to begin repairs," the delegate stated, his voice ringing through the comms. "The vote was only finalized moments ago." Thorn looked up. He wiped a smear of hydraulic fluid from his forehead. He didn't stand up. He didn't offer a salute. "The vote was a suggestion," Thorn replied, his voice raspy from hours of shouting over the roar of the machinery. "The rescue was a requirement. You have disrupted the natural flow of the legislative process," the delegate insisted. "You have bypassed the safety of the protocol." Thorn stood up then. He stood in the middle of the crowded square, surrounded by the people he had saved, and he looked up at the pristine, untouched ships of the council. "We are the humans," Thorn said, his voice echoing in the sudden, heavy silence of the square. "We are the species that knows how to run until the sun comes up. We are the species that understands that rules are just descriptions of the past, but survival is the requirement of the future." He gestured to the city around him. "You can take your 19 hours, and you can debate them until the stars go cold. But as long as we are here, there will always be someone who doesn't wait for your permission to save a life." The delegate had no response. He looked at the humans, really looked at them, and for the first time he understood the nature of the exemption. It was not a loophole, it was a warning. Humanity was not a member of the council because they were compliant. They were a member because they were the only ones willing to be the exception to the rule. The galaxy remained vast. The council remained slow, but the humans stayed ready. And as the Valiant lifted off, leaving the atmosphere of Kale-4 behind, Thorn knew that the real work had only just begun. Because out there, in the dark, silent reaches of space, there were always more fires. And they were the only ones with the legs to reach them. The lesson for the galaxy was simple, though few would admit it. The universe does not owe you 19 hours. It owes you nothing but the opportunity to prove that you are capable of surviving the next one. Persistence is the ultimate, final argument. And the humans had already won it, before the debate had even started. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more incredible stories. Hit the bell icon to stay updated on our latest uploads.